What is up, 24-hour party people? We are here. It's branding for breweries. We're slightly later than intended due to some technical difficulties, but we are here nonetheless. So do not worry, friends. I know you're going to be excited about this one because today I bring one of the phenomenal beer minds all the way from over the pond, the wonderful Mr. Brad Pendleton. Now, I'm going to let him introduce what his history is because he's done a little bit of everything. But ultimately, Brad is going to join me today because we're going to be talking about this whole idea that you can make great beer and still go bust. There's a lot more that goes into it than just making great beer. But before I invite Brad in, I just want to give a huge shout out to Charles Fareham, the show sponsor. These guys are doing phenomenal things and actually let me know earlier on today that they've got a special archive for each and every hop that they release. So if you're struggling for the storytelling side of things about each of the hops, where the names came from, and something to really bring that story to life, reach out to them. They've got loads of videos, images, and background about each and every hop that can help you tell that story better. Anyway, that's enough of that. Let's get Brad in, let's have a chat, and let's have some fun. Brad, sir, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Tim.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you for joining me, my man.
I'm excited.
Good stuff. So, Brad, I suppose, where do we start? Maybe some of my listeners won't be familiar with yourself. Could you just give us a bit of a short introduction, of your plotted history in the brewing world, please?
Sure. I've been in the business for about 40 years. I've worked all three tiers of the alcohol system in the United States, which the alcohol system was created by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and it taxes at each stage. That's all that means. So it's retail, supplier, wholesale. I worked at retail for 10 years. I ran the biggest bar in the state and the top sports bar in Denver. I then went to wholesale and worked at the biggest distributor in Colorado. I spent 10 years there. I became a Certified Cicerone, which is a beer expert. It's the bar exam for beer. And then I was handpicked to create the specialty craft division for MillerCoors. After that, I went to the supplier side and worked for some small breweries. Most recently, I was working for a marketing company called Pub Pass, where I visited over 1,700 breweries across the United States in 4 years. That's a quick snapshot.
I mean, but what a snapshot over 40 years, my man. I take my hat off to you. 1,700 breweries that you visited, at least. You got to tell me, Brad, like, out of those 1,700 breweries, what are the biggest patterns are you seeing in breweries that make them last?
So it's knowing who you are, knowing your brand. I think of it kind of like the NFL shield. You protect that brand like the NFL protects that shield. And that's what the great ones do. And then probably the biggest other factor, hands down, would be having a qualified trained brewer.
So, know your brand, have a great brewer. Is there a third one you want to throw into the mix, or is it actually just two and you nail those and you've got a successful
I mean, those are the two biggest. The rest is what we're getting ready to talk about, is all the, it's fun to make beer and talk about beer and be beer, but it's a business.
Fair enough.
And that's where things change drastically for a lot of these brewers or people who want to own breweries.
And you're right. We are going to go on to talk about it because we were talking offline and, great beer, as the title said, you can make great beer and still go bust. So what is it that you think brewery owners just don't understand or maybe underestimate from the business side of things of running a brewery?
Right. So the biggest things I see is, number one, build your business before you build your brewery. And what I mean by that is you got to understand your numbers. You got to be able to control costs and then make decisions on profitability, not just passion. Hey, I love to make beer, but does that mean I can go out and build a brewery and sell the beer I make? Secondly, it's creating an experience that gets people to come back. It's not the beer that's going to get them to come back necessarily. It's the experience they have while they're there, right? So beer will get you through the door, but outstanding hospitality, consistency, the vibe of the brewery, that's what's going to make you successful. The third thing I'd say is stay true to who you are. Breweries that survive don't chase fads. They don't chase the latest thing. They know their identity. They brew consistently excellent beer, and they evolve rather than reacting to every market fad.
See, this to me, this is music to my ears as a branding expert. That you got to know the business, you got to stick to your guns, you got to really work that hospitality. But at no point is there this idea of you got to brew good beer. Do you think all of those traits can exist in one person, or is this actually a brewer's got to go and find those people who can help you to lock in around the edges?
No, I mean, there's people that can do it, but what you see is so many people spend time developing these great recipes and these great beers, but they don't focus on the day-to-day operation, right? They don't focus on the cost. How much is my lease? How much is all these other things that fall into it? And so I have a great beer recipe. I spent 4 years making it. Well, did you spend that same time developing your marketing plan or your business plan because you're in the hospitality business first and then you're a brewery?
Fair. So with that in mind, then, if you say like you spent 4 years developing a recipe, but you're not spending 4 years on developing your finance plan, what are the questions and things that need answering before a brewer goes in and like signs that lease? What do they need to know about building the tap room, or operational questions that they need
Right.
to ask?
So, and that's where the hard questions to yourself come from. You almost have to peel back the layers of the onion on yourself and be honest with yourself, not just here's what I want to be and here's where I want to go, unicorns and fairies. So who's my customer going to be? Right? Where will most of my revenue come from? So now we're getting back to knowing who you are, right? Am I a tap room? Am I a brew pub? Am I going into distribution right away? So those things, create that. Where does my revenue come? Do I have food? So now it's beer and food. So where's my revenue at? How much beer do I have to sell over a month to cover my fixed expenses? You should know that Mendoza line hands down. So little cheats are, you got to make 10 times what your lease is per square foot to be successful. Now, a lot of other factors go into that, but that's a good rule of thumb, right? Another is how much working capital do I need beyond construction? And this is probably the biggest mistake I've seen, hands down. I go 1 year to see these breweries and I go back the next year, and some of the coolest breweries, were a couple in Jacksonville, Florida, that phenomenal buildings, phenomenal spaces, great pizza, immense just buildings that are so cool, but they spent all their money opening the doors and they underestimated how much cash flow they need to operate once you're open. The coffers just don't fill up on day one. You got to build that brand. So you got to have a plan getting through there. What happens if sales are 25% below projections for the first year? You got to have a plan for that. People don't think of that. They're just going to be successful. I'm going to cash in my 401k. Maybe I'm even going to hire a really good brewer and, have this great building and all this, but then what? Right. And then you got to know within your team, and it can be one person to your, previous point, but it's who's responsible for sales. And that's whether it's just in the building, at retail, if you're at retail, on and off premise, whatever that is. You got who's responsible for operation, who's responsible for brewing schedules, ordering, who's responsible for finance. And that stuff has to all be worked out. You can't find your way and just get there, with fingers crossed.
Yeah, stumbling through it, just trying to find the answers.
Yeah, you got to have a plan. You got to know that plan, and then, it sounds cliche, but plan your work and work your plan.
If we go back a little bit, like the first thing you said is you've got to know what kind of business you are.
Right.
But what advice do you have for breweries to work out what kind they are? Tap room, wholesale, regional.
Sure.
How do they decide on what's the best route for them?
So that decision should come before the first tank is ever ordered. Each model requires different investments, different staffing, different margins, and there's different expectations. So, for example, tap rooms, they generate the highest margins because you don't have any middlemen getting it to the consumer, right? But they also require exceptional hospitality. For instance, in Colorado, you can throw a rock and hit a brewery. We have over 420. Ironic, it's Colorado with 420, but 420 breweries at any given time in Colorado. So you've got to, your hospitality has to be exceptional. Your building, your cleanliness, everything, right? Then if you're decide wholesale is the way you want to go and you want to sell outside, you got to realize you're going to pay 30% to that wholesaler to get you out there, right? But it requires scale, much more disciplined sales execution. And I can't stress enough the distributor relationship, because they control everything. As much or as little as they want to put into your brand is what you get. Then with going to wholesale, it's who am I going to go with? Am I going to go with a big distributor? There's the biggest one in Colorado we had 51 suppliers, but 85% of sales came from 5 of them. So the rest are kind of along for the ride. Mm-hmm. So how do you differentiate yourself and get the salesperson to recommend your brand when they're in making that sales call?
So is it a case of like, it doesn't really matter what route you're going to go, you have to pick your pain. You have to be aware of what that challenge is going to be with that route to market?
Most certainly. Even with picking distributors, if I pick a small distributor, so the big distributor I worked at, we had 75 salespeople on the street. That's 75 people out representing your brand, hopefully. But a small distributor where you might get more focus and more attention may only have 10 folks covering both on and off premise. Right? So now how do I get attention from them? I worked with a small distributor as a brand I was launching into Colorado, and always got the talk from the owner of, oh yeah, we'll represent your brand. Of course we are. Of course. I go out on a ride along with one of them one day. We hit 12 stops, and every single person we talked to took our brand, whether it was a liquor store or on premise. We got draft handles, we got shelf placements. And what that told me, if I can do 12 out of 12 with this guy, he's not even representing my brand when I'm not standing here. Right? So those are just things that you got to sift through in making that decision. And either way, you're going to question it. And it's stay true to your brand, stay true to your plan, and work through it. There's ebbs and flows for each way. The next one is regional brands. And that I think you should really wait until you're more established. But regional brands, they require significant capital to invest into a market. The marketing investment that it takes, and operational consistency. So once you get out of your building, and even in self-distribution, you got to be able to fill the pipeline you're creating. If you can't fill that pipeline, once these sales reps go out and gain you real estate at retail, and you can't fill that pipeline, you'll never get the real estate back, whether that's shelf space, in liquor stores, or it's draft handles at the bar. Yeah. The biggest thing is some people try to be all three too early. which means you're not doing anything exceptionally.
You're just kind of like stretching yourself too thin over multiple routes, right?
Yeah. Like when people talk about multitasking, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't really multitask. What you're doing are several things get your attention, but you're not doing anything exceptionally. Do one thing, do it very well, and then move on.
So what would you say are like the influential factors about which route you choose? Brewery location, I assume would be one thing, right?
Location is, once again, clear location, right? If you have a spot, there are folks I've seen that are the worst brewery owners with marginal beer, but because of the location, they succeed. Right? I think when you're making your business plan is, what are your financials? What do you have to invest into yourself, so to speak? Because that dictates how you're going to go into the market, right? Do I want to have food? A lot of folks don't want to mess with food, but then they don't realize the money they're giving away to these food trucks and to whoever, right? So it's just what fits you and what you're willing to do to make it work, and what's your understanding of it all. So many of these people cash in a 401k because they won a homebrew contest and think they can open a brewery.
Yeah, tricky, challenging.
Yeah. It's if there was any business that was easy, wouldn't we all do it?
Well, yeah, that's the thing.
Right.
So what are the numbers that every wannabe brewery owner should really have a good grasp on before cashing in the 401k? Like what's the checklist you got to go through?
So, and this is, you're going to sit there and go, oh, he's yelling out all these classic, margins and things like that, but it's what it is. So every single owner should know your gross margin by brand. In other words, which beers are paying the bills. Oh, I just want to make different beer every day. Oh, good luck. Contribution margin by sales channel. So whether it's, if you're in distribution, off premise, on premise, if you're a brew pub, is it at the tap? Is beer going out the door? Are they growlers? Are they whatever? You need to know those margins by channel and by brand, right? Cost per barrel produced. Now that's not just ingredients that goes into the beer, right? It's everything. It's the lights, it's the water, it's the power, it's the, it's everything. So understanding your cost per barrel, labor as a percentage of sales. Am I overstaffed? Do I have way too many people in here working, even though, hey, my customers love it? Am I maximizing my, my labor? Inventory turns. So what's burning, what's just sitting there, right? The beer loss in the yield. So how much am I yielding when I brew? And then how much am I losing, whether it be free samples or just dumping beer down the drain? Does my team even know how to pour beer correctly? Right? There's a whole class I used to teach. It's 45 minutes long on how to pour beer properly. Cash flow, of course. EBITDA, right? Which is your earnings before taxes, depreciation, amortization. Where's, similar to what we said earlier, but where's my break-even volume? Right? Knowing that that's where you can sleep at night. Hey, we're right there, during the month. This is what we got to hit for the month. We're right there. Okay. Or, hey, we got to get after it. Right? Revenue per taproom seat. Right? And we'll touch on this in a second, where that really means something. And then revenue per employee. Right? So that gets back to proper staffing, making sure I don't need 3 bartenders if I don't need 3 bartenders. I don't need 3 wait staff if I, need 1. Or can the bartender do it all? Right? For whatever day. So where I talk about revenue per tap room seat, it's also how many draft lines, some of these breweries you go into, there's 50 draft lines, right? Well, how many seats do they have? So for example, let's say I have 20 draft lines and 50 seats. Then, and using half barrels, so we're not bouncing all over with numbers, but half barrels, that means, so the lineup one time for those 20 kegs is 3,080 pints of beer. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So divide that by 50, and that means each seat in the room has to drink 62 beers to go through that lineup one time.
Wow. When you put it like that, it's simple maths, isn't it? But it's all of a
very
sudden
simple,
makes it a
but
challenge.
people get excited. I want to have all this. Well, if I can't burn through my beers, what happens? My beer's sitting there, now it's going old. Now it doesn't taste good. Now my brand is suffering. Right? So if I had 10 draft lines, would that be enough?
Yo, I just want to take a second out of Branding for Breweries to make you aware of something. For those of you who don't know, outside of hosting Branding for Breweries, writing the book Branding for Breweries, I also provide independent breweries with hands-on support with their branding, design, and marketing. In fact, it's even better than that because it's not just me, it's a whole bunch of awesome independent brewery folks who are dedicated to doing the very best for each and every independent brewery. The team have worked with some incredible breweries like Northern Monk, Osset, Brains, Pillars, all over the globe, and gaining results like doubling revenue, winning Rebrand of the Year, even gaining over 7 million views on the TikTok channel. So if you're looking to level up your brewery's branding and marketing this year, drop us a message over at www.thebrandweavercollective.com and a member of the team will get back to you and we can have a chat. Now, back to the show. See, like, there are some of these numbers that someone who opens a new brewery would potentially know ahead of it, but there's going to be ones that you only really know once you get into the thick of it, I suppose. How quickly should you be trying to gauge those numbers and get that information back? Like, could you gauge it from a week, or does it take a month? Does it take a quarter?
I mean, you can track it. However, usually, it's by the month. And then once you get a year under your belt, you always look at the previous year. And then you check the dates of that year, because you can't just say, oh, on March 6th of last year, which could have been a Saturday, we did this much business. And this year it's a Tuesday. So you got to tweak, you got to be aware of how the dates shift. But once you get that first year under your belt, then you look at last year. So where were we? Where are we now? Are we gaining ground? You always want to beat last year's number. Mm-hmm. And if you're doing that, you're usually in a pretty decent spot. But there's no manual that just tells you, okay, new guy, here you go. That's why you don't step into it without having an idea. Imagine you don't know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's where we are. That's where some of these guys walk into stuff. We had Growler USA was in Colorado, and it was a place that had 140 draft lines at every location. And the idea was you can come fill up growlers, and these guys would buy 3 kegs of everything you wanted to sell them. Right? Then at 30 days in Colorado, if you haven't paid your bill, it's illegal to sell you more beer. Well, these guys, every single one of them, would get to 30 days and couldn't pay their bills because they ordered so much beer and they're not pouring through it. Right? And it turned out they were all IT guys who cashed in 401ks and went with this concept of, yeah, I want to run one of these type of places. So it's that you got to know the numbers. You got to learn the numbers. Go talk to other brewers. The brewing community is one of the few businesses that will work together, and especially craft beer. They're all in it thinking we're all against the big guy, right? The Coors, the Budweisers, the Millers. So there's ways to go chat with those people. Sam Adams, Jim Cook, the owner, he has a program that he created where he teaches breweries how to start their business. And there's things like that out there, but you got to go find them. You know, MillerCoors being a huge company, the Coors Brewery in Golden used to have a thing with the city council would put on for new brewers to come ask them questions. And people don't realize it, but they go help you where Budweiser would not. Budweiser, in order to distribute you, has to own you and things like that. So it's out there, but you have to go find it. You have to go look for it. You have to go ask. Go to successful places and ask those questions. Hey, I'm interested in doing this. What were your biggest struggles in the first, and everybody has a different story. But you go talk to 10 of them and you'll get some good insight.
And I suppose even just like sitting in their tap room on certain days of the week to see how busy it is, the events that they're doing, all that kind of research will help you when calculating the number of lines that you're going to put in, because you know the number of seats. It all adds up.
Well, and so I think the most critical part of this question that you just asked was busy doesn't mean profitable. Cash flow tells the story. So just because you're busy doesn't mean you're making, there's places that serve food, for instance, that every time they serve a burger, they're losing $2 because they've not
done the maths.
Right. They're not running it correctly. Yeah.
So say you have established a solid tap room. You've got, good finance coming in. That's it's profitable. And you're looking, right, we're going to move into distribution next.
Okay.
Like you've got a choice of self-distribution or maybe bringing in a distributor.
Right.
When does it make sense to a brewery to do that?
Right. So you got to weigh costs once again. Self-distribution makes sense when your brewery has enough local demand to justify controlling customer relationships while maintaining healthy margins. Right. But now I got to buy a truck. I got to have driver. So I'm payroll. Right. I got to have somebody out there selling it. So there's costs involved, but it's a good way to see if you fit outside your building without over the top, signing these contracts with distributors that you're committed to for 5 years, whatever your contract is. And then once again, you're paying that distributor 30%. So if your keg's $150, 30% goes to them. So and then you make it up in volume. Right. So now, once again, can I fill that pipeline? But once distribution expands beyond what your team can service consistently, a distributor could be the better option. Right. But then now, am I going to the biggest distributor? Am I going to one of the mids to, things like that? Because if 85% of sales come from 5 breweries, I'm probably not going to get a lot of attention. Right. They do what they're called monthly business objectives, where there's brands they focus on every month and their sales reps get commissions payouts off achieving those goals. Well, being a really small guy, you may only get on it once, maybe twice a year, where those 5 big guys are on it every single month. Right. So, and then your smaller distributors, it's getting those sales reps to, and that's where you create those relationships with the distributor, with the sales reps to, hey man, pimp my brand, work my brand, and getting that guy when he's standing in front of a retailer to think, oh, I'm going to sell X instead of Y. Right. So, and it's making sure they know the story and they know your brand. So they're not up there fumbling through it. They're comfortable speaking about your brand. And that's where you go, you go to sales meetings, you go do ride-alongs, you go do all these things to help them know your brand and then be able to present your brand.
I was going to say, that's the thing. How do you bring someone on board? But it's the education side of things. Again, it is you put the effort in to make sure that they feel comfortable and confident with your brand, to incentivize them in a way, I suppose, because they know more about it.
So I go to the distributor. I go to their sales meeting. I take my brand. I may take 6 different brands. I sit down and I walk them through each brand, do tasting profiles. Here's what you're going to taste. Here's what you're going to get. And then I romance that brand. Here's the story behind this beer, right? So that they can go tell that story. And they're not going to do it exactly the same way, but you're giving them the bullet points to speak to it. And then when they're comfortable to talk about it, it's a lot easier to sell, right? But breweries shouldn't seek distribution because they need more sales. They seek distribution because of the proven demand, and they need help scaling efficiently, right? Like I said, though, before, once that pipeline's turned on, you got to keep it full. If you can't fill that demand, you won't get back the real estate that you lose.
Of course. Yeah, you've got to be in that solid position that you feel really confident. And it must be quite a big step up from just like servicing your own supply or demand.
Well, certainly, depending on your distributor. If it's a really small distributor with one truck and maybe 5 salespeople, it's not going to be monumental. If it's, the biggest distributor in Colorado's Coors Distributing, it's 54 trucks, 75 salespeople, right? And what you got to realize is working with a distributor isn't a delivery service. It's a partnership in developing your brand.
Yeah.
So, the biggest thing is when you work with that distributor is making them feel good about you.
When you say about it does depend, I suppose, on the size of the distributor. It's like a logical way to progress that you start with one of the smaller ones, you get confident with the process, with the model, and then you start to eke up and you start to build that up.
It kind of goes back and forth. I know brands that have started with small distributors and the distributors have grown. The one I was talking about that had 1 truck, he now has 8 trucks, 2 up in the mountains. So he's built, and the brewery I launched into Colorado stayed there. They're happy with that growth and how it goes. When you take that step from a small or mid distributor to a big one, it's game on. Right? You're walking in with the big boys. Now, I don't want to get lost in the long tail, which is how sales work, right? They pivot down to the long tail. How am I going to get out of that long tail and up that curve into there where they're focused on you and you're important to that distributor? And that's when things change.
Earlier on, when you were talking about kind of the numbers to know, you talked about knowing the big sellers, the popular liquid that's moving. Why is it so important that in a market that is obsessed with new styles, new releases, having a really solid core range is essential?
Right. So core beers are what build breweries. So, let's talk about what's the number 1 style in the United States is IPAs, and has been since about 2008 or 9, right? But with everything craft beer does, 9 out of every 10 beers sold today worldwide is yellow fizzy beer. Okay, so that gives you an idea of scope. So let me dial into your question a little better. So limited releases create excitement. And the best example I can think of is Russian River, which is a brewery on the West Coast. They make some great beers, but they have 2 beers people kill for. People will line up down the block and stand in line for 3 or 4 hours if there's 1 keg that's going to be tapped, right? And it's called Pliny. It's Russian River. It's Pliny the Elder and Pliny the Younger. Now, the best beer they make is Blind Pig. They're all 3 IPAs, but Blind Pig you can get everywhere. And it's far better. But it's that limited release mentality that makes you want it. You want what you can't have.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But core beers create businesses. Retailers need dependable products that they can order confidently and over and over. If I give you a handle I don't want every oddball thing you come up with. If you have a great amber or a great, lager, I want that great beer over and over, right? Retailers need dependable products that they can reorder confidently. And then consumers develop habits around beers they trust, right?
Mm.
So a strong flagship will provide predictable production schedules. It improves operational efficiency, simplifies inventory, and it helps build lasting brand recognition. Innovation attracts attention. So consistency builds loyalty.
So on that point, like innovation attracts attention. Drinkers are changing. You've got more people wanting like low calorie or functional, low sugar, moderation. How have you seen the best breweries respond to the change in drinker style without losing their identity along the way?
Right. And there's a lot of hurdles in that a lot of brewers have never had to chase before. But one quick thing, that we all say in the beer industry is you don't want to drink your father's beer. So especially the millennials and Gen Z, they they want low calorie, they want lower sugars, things like that. They still want to catch a buzz, but you have all that, and then now, especially here in America, you have THC getting involved.
Mm-hmm.
So cannabis becomes a factor in playing. So the core things are still the core things. It's you have to listen to your customers without abandoning your brand. Protect the shield, right? That is everything. Protecting your brand. Think how the NFL does it and emulate that, right? If your brewery's known for balanced lagers, then that's where your lighter option belongs. If your brewery's known for hazy IPAs, maybe a focus on lower ABVs rather than making, like hard seltzers just because everybody on the planet's doing it. All these guys are making these seltzers. And like, oh yeah, I'm trying to give another option. No, you're not. You can turn it in 48 hours and it costs you 20% of what it costs you to make beer.
Mm.
Right? Seltzers are easy, they're cheap, and you can turn them. But it can be an option if that's your brand. Once again, stay true to your shield. Every product you do should strengthen the brand, not confuse it. You're not looking to have every style under the sun. You can't do it. Once again, that's multitasking, right? Focus on what you're great at. The goal isn't to follow trends. The goal is to meet customers' needs, evolving needs, and in a way that's authentic to who you are.
It's kind of there's a bit of a relationship. There's a symbiotic side of things there too. Like you've got to give the customer what they want, but within the boundaries of what your brand can deliver. As soon as you break away from one of those, it becomes a challenge.
Exactly.
So, Brad, before we came on the show, like you've said, you can see we've been in a bit of a dark time with breweries. Obviously, we've seen a lot of closures, but you think the market is going to strengthen ultimately based on what's going on?
Yes.
What should breweries be doing to be ready, for the incoming growth cycle that you believe is going to happen?
Right. So people panic whenever we hit one of those downturns. But over the last 400 years, breweries, it just up and down, up and down, up and down. It always comes back. It'll always go back down. It'll come back. So you've got to learn to survive the cycle, right? And so this particular correction was influenced by COVID. And, now we're coming out of COVID and you're seeing a lot of breweries either change location or close because, my landlord raised my lease three times what it was. Well, during COVID, they couldn't. So now landlords and stuff are trying to recoup what they lost during COVID. And now we're caught in that, okay, I've either got to survive this, work with it, go somewhere else, whatever that is. But the correction, in essence, what it does, it makes you become a better operator, and those that survive will emerge stronger. Now's the time that you improve quality systems, you strengthen your financial discipline, you invest in your people, which doesn't have to be dollars, right? It can be training. It can be teaching them the styles. When they speak to your beers, do they know the styles, or do they try and BS their way through it? And people that really know beer recognize that. Like I always tell all my friends, if you don't know, don't BS me, because that just makes you look like a fool, right? So just a little side note there. But you know, invest in your people, build customer loyalty, refine your branding, improve your taproom experience, eliminate unnecessary complexity. You know, when you improve your taproom experience, that can be a simple thing as painting a chipped wall. You know, stuff you walk by every day and you get used to it, but you're not looking at your business, right? Walk in that door and look around and be like, oh man, we need to throw some paint over there. We need to fix that that chair that's wobbly. It can be that simple, you know, but making sure your team is on point. And this is the time to get all that done. And as I've said, growth always returns, but the breweries positioned to benefit won't always be the biggest. It's the ones that use this period to become operationally excellent, right? So where the next growth cycle is going to do, it's going to reward the disciplined businesses, because we're a business first and then a brewery, far more than simply just great brewers.
It makes a load of sense. It is. I think one of the phrases I use a lot is it's hard to read the label when you're stuck inside the jar. And you talk about kind of, you know, painting that wall or fixing that chair. But when you're so stuck into it, actually just taking a moment to step back and looking at more holistically to go, right, objectively, if I were a drinker, what do I need to fix? Because those are the impressions that count.
Yeah. Go sit in the customer's seat. So many stand behind the bar or stand in the kitchen or in the office. Go sit in the customer's seat and look around. What do you see?
Brad, this has been a hell of a conversation. It smacks through so many points and so many things for people to think about, bud.
It's a lot to unpack. It's a lot.
There is. But it makes a lot of sense, of course. You know, having that great beer is just one part of it. If you don't know the business, if you don't know the brand, if you don't know the finance, then you're really setting yourself up for a really hard time. It's not impossible, but it's a lot harder than it needs to be, I suppose.
Learning on the fly is expensive. It can be done, but it's expensive.
So, Brad, as we draw to a close, good sir, I wonder if people go, all right, Brad's a pretty interesting chap. I'd like to chat to him a little bit more. I'd love to hear more of his stories and maybe pick his brains. How should people get in touch with you, Brad?
Oh, anytime. They can email me and we can figure out a way to communicate in a heartbeat. The email is mcbeerman88@gmail.com.
mcbeerman88@gmail.com.
In a heartbeat. I love to talk about beer. It drives my wife crazy.
God bless your wife for letting you.
What's even better, I love to talk about the history of beer, the history of style. That's the cool stuff.
Dude, that'll be a podcast for another day, my man. Another day, I should imagine.
Most certainly.
Brad, just a massive thank you for joining me today. It's been a fascinating conversation, and I hope those who tuned in have really enjoyed it. Everyone who has tuned in, thank you so much for your time. For those of you listening in the future, this is Tim talking to you from the past. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Stick around for loads more episodes of Branding for Breweries, because we've got some more phenomenal guests just like Brad coming up. Brad, until next time, my man, you take care.
Cheers.
That's a wrap on this week's episode of Branding for Breweries. If you got something great from it, hit follow, like and subscribe on your favorite streaming app. Or even better, leave a review, share it with your brewery pals, or get in touch because I want to chat to you. Rock on!